The morning sun cast long shadows across the sprawling military base as Sarah Chen stepped out of the black sedan that had brought her from the airport. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, and a plain navy sweater. Nothing that would draw attention to herself. Her driver, a young corporal named Martinez, couldn't have been more than 22. He'd spent the entire 40-minute drive from Reagan National talking about his girlfriend back in Texas, his plans to make sergeant, his dreams of becoming a pilot someday. Sarah had listened quietly, offering encouraging words when appropriate, asking thoughtful questions that made him light up with enthusiasm. "Thank you for the conversation, ma'am," Martinez said as he pulled her single duffel bag from the trunk. "Most officers don't really, talk to us like regular people." Sarah smiled softly. "I'm not an officer, Corporal. Just a contractor doing some consulting work." "Oh," Martinez looked embarrassed. "Sorry, I just assumed because of the base access clearance, and no apology needed." She took the duffel, its weight familiar and comforting in her hand. "You have a good day, Martinez. And call that girlfriend tonight. Don't wait." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? As Martinez drove away, Sarah stood for a moment, taking in Naval Station Norfolk. She knew this base. Had been here a dozen times over her career, but never like this, never invisible. The main gate loomed ahead, security personnel checking IDs with practiced efficiency. The morning shift change was in full swing, sailors in working uniforms, streaming toward their duty stations, the distant sound of a ship's horn echoing across the water, the smell of salt air mixed with diesel fuel and fresh paint. Sarah approached the security checkpoint, her temporary contractor badge already in hand. The guard, a petty officer second class with a name tape that read Johnson, barely glanced at her. "Purpose of visit?" he asked, his tone bored. "Consulting work with base operations," Sarah replied evenly. Johnson scanned her badge, his eyes flicking to his computer screen. Something made him pause. He looked at her more carefully, taking in her military bearing, the way she stood with her weight balanced, her shoulders back without being rigid, the alertness in her eyes that came from years of training. "You prior service, ma'am?" he asked, his tone slightly more respectful. "Long time ago," Sarah said, which was technically true. Her last deployment had ended 8 months ago. Different lifetime. Johnson nodded, understanding that look. A lot of contractors were prior military, using their expertise in the civilian world. He handed back her badge. "Welcome to Norfolk. Building 7 is straight ahead. Take the first left past the commissary." "Thank you, petty officer." As Sarah walked through the gate, she felt the familiar weight of returning to this world. The sounds, the smells, the rhythm of military life, it was all still there, coded into her DNA after 23 years of service. But now she was seeing it from a different angle. Not as Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of the Atlantic Fleet Strike Group. Not as Sparrow, the call sign she'd earned flying F/A-18 seconds in the Gulf. Just as Sarah Chen, consultant, temporary badge, no rank insignia, no authority, invisible. She passed a group of young sailors heading toward the mess hall. Their conversation was animated, complaining about duty rotations and a chief who was riding them hard. None of them looked at her. She was just another civilian on a base full of contractors, consultants, and support personnel. A commander in dress whites hurried past, nearly bumping into her as he checked his phone. He didn't apologize, didn't even seem to register her presence. In his world, she didn't exist. Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. This was going to be interesting. Building 7 housed base operations, a sprawling facility where the daily business of running a massive naval installation took place. Sarah pushed through the heavy doors into the fluorescent-lit interior, where the air conditioning was running too cold and the smell of burnt coffee permeated everything. The receptionist's desk was empty. Sarah waited, her duffel at her feet, observing. The walls were covered with official portraits: the President, the Secretary of Defense, the Chief of Naval Operations, the base commander. There was also a display case showing the base's history, photographs from World War II to present day. "Can I help you?" A woman appeared from a side hallway, mid-40s, wearing civilian clothes with a badge that identified her as Patricia Coleman, Administrative Specialist. Sarah Chen, she said, extending her hand. I'm here for the operational efficiency review. I believe Captain Morrison is expecting me. Patricia's expression shifted to mild confusion. Oh, I don't think Captain Morrison mentioned let me check his calendar. She moved to her computer, clicking through screens. I don't see any appointments today. Are you sure it's today? Positive? Sarah said calmly. I flew in from San Diego this morning specifically for this. Well, the captain is in a meeting right now with the command staff. They're discussing the upcoming inspection. Patricia looked uncertain. I could have you wait, but it might be a while. Or I could get his deputy, Commander Rawlings. I'll wait, Sarah said. No problem at all. Patricia gestured to a row of uncomfortable-looking plastic chairs against the wall. Coffee's in the break room down the hall if you want some. Fair warning, it's terrible. Sarah smiled. I've had worse. As she settled into a chair, Sarah pulled out her phone and appeared to check emails. In reality, she was observing everything. The flow of personnel through the building, the body language of the staff, the efficiency or lack thereof in how people moved and communicated. 20 minutes passed. Through the glass windows of a conference room, she could see the command staff meeting. Captain Morrison stood at the head of the table, gesturing emphatically at a presentation slide. Around the table sat various department heads: operations, logistics, intelligence, engineering. And then she saw him. Commander Jack Rawlings, the base deputy commander, 42 years old, surface warfare officer, known for his by-the-book approach and his complete intolerance for what he called administrative bloat. Sarah had read his file. He'd been passed over for captain twice, which had made him bitter and defensive. He blamed the Navy's political correctness and lowered standards for his stalled career. This was going to be even more interesting than she'd thought. The meeting broke up around 10:30. Officers filed out, some looking relieved, others frustrated. Captain Morrison remained behind, gathering his materials. He was a good officer, Sarah knew. Competent, fair, but overwhelmed by the administrative demands of running a base this size while also preparing for the Inspector General's visit in 2 weeks. Commander Rawlings emerged, spotted Patricia, and headed straight for the desk. He didn't notice Sarah sitting against the wall. Patricia, I need the supply requisition reports by 1300, he said, his tone sharp. No excuses this time. Yes, sir. Commander, there's also and tell Martinez in logistics that if he can't figure out how to properly fill out a DD Form 1348, he can find a new job. This is basic stuff. Yes, sir, but there's a consultant here. I don't have time for Rawlings. Finally looked where Patricia was gesturing and saw Sarah. His expression was dismissive. Who are you? Sarah stood, maintaining her composure. Sarah Chen. I'm here for the operational efficiency review. The what? Rawlings cut her off. The operational efficiency review, Sarah repeated calmly. I believe it was scheduled with Captain Morrison several weeks ago. Rawlings looked at Patricia. Did you know about this? No, sir, it's not on the captain's calendar, and then there's your answer. Rawlings turned back to Sarah. I don't know who authorized you to be here, but we're in the middle of preparing for an IG inspection. We don't have time for some civilian contractor to wander around asking questions and getting in the way. I understand you're busy, Sarah said evenly. But this review was requested by... I don't care who requested it. Rawlings's voice rose slightly. Do you have any idea how a military base works? We can't just have random people showing up claiming they're supposed to be here. There are protocols, procedures, security concerns. Sarah felt her jaw tighten slightly, but her expression remained neutral. I went through security. My credentials were verified. I have proper clearance. Clearance for what? To waste our time? Rawlings crossed his arms. With the grossed infected jurors, in the odd of the D2 arms, with the grossed information, with the grossed in filed. Look, Miss Chen, I'm sure you mean well, but whatever consulting company sent you here clearly didn't coordinate with the actual chain of command. So I suggest you go back to whatever hotel you're staying at and have your boss call Captain Morrison's office to properly schedule this review for after our inspection. I flew in from San Diego this morning, Sarah said quietly. Then I guess that's an expensive mistake on somebody's part. Rawlings was already turning away. Patricia, see that Miss Chen gets escorted off base. Make sure she understands the proper procedures for scheduling official visits. Sarah remained standing, her duffel still at her feet, as Commander Rawlings disappeared back into the conference room. Patricia looked mortified. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," Patricia said quietly. "The commander can be direct." "It's fine," Sarah said, though her eyes had hardened slightly. "Is Captain Morrison available now?" "He's on a conference call with FleetCom, probably another 20 minutes. Patricia lowered her voice. "Look, between you and me, Commander Rawlings has been under a lot of stress. The IG inspection is a big deal, and there have been some issues that he's trying to resolve before the inspectors arrive." "What kind of issues?" Sarah asked. Patricia hesitated. "I probably shouldn't say." "Operational inefficiencies?" Sarah suggested. "Supply chain problems? Personnel management concerns?" Patricia's expression confirmed all three. "How did you?" "Lucky guess." Sarah picked up her duffel. "Patricia, could you do me a favor? When Captain Morrison is available, could you let him know I'm here? Don't mention the interaction with Commander Rawlings. Just tell him Sarah Chen from the consultant review is waiting." "Of course, ma'am." Sarah headed toward the break room, needing a moment to think. The coffee was indeed terrible, but she poured herself a cup anyway, drinking it black like she'd been doing for 2 decades. The break room had a small table with mismatched chairs and a bulletin board covered in official notices, safety reminders, and a faded poster about operational security. Through the doorway, she could hear voices from the main corridor. "Another waste of taxpayer money," a male voice was saying. "Some consultant who thinks she knows how to run a naval base better than people who've actually served." "Rawlings didn't even let her talk," another voice replied. This one sounded younger, less certain. "Because there's nothing to talk about. These civilian consultants are all the same. They show up, ask a bunch of stupid questions, write a report full of recommendations that any ensign could have figured out, and then charge the government $50,000 for their expertise." Sarah recognized the first voice now. Commander Rawlings. He must have stepped into the Rawlings hallway with whoever he was talking to. "But sir, didn't the Admiral's office specifically request—" "I don't care what some desk jockey in D.C. requested," Rawlings interrupted. "We're trying to run a base here. We've got real work to do. The last thing we need is some woman with a laptop and a business degree telling us how to do our jobs." Sarah set down her coffee cup carefully. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear or nervousness, but from the effort of keeping her composure. She'd heard this kind of dismissal before, early in her career, when female pilots were still fighting for respect. She'd hoped the Navy had moved beyond it. Apparently not everyone had gotten the message. "Lieutenant Vasquez," Rawlings continued, "I want you to pull together all the supply reports for the past 6 months. If the IG is going to find problems, I want to know about them first." "Yes, sir. What about the consultant?" "What about her? She'll be gone by lunch, probably already complaining to her boss about the big mean Navy commander who wouldn't let her waste our time." Their footsteps faded down the corridor. Sarah counted to 10, then 20. Then she walked back to the reception area. Patricia was on the phone, but she held up a finger, indicating she'd be just a moment. When she hung up, she looked relieved. "Good news, ma'am. Captain Morrison's call ended early. He can see you now." "Thank you, Patricia. His office is down this hallway, 3rd door on the left." "And ma'am?" Patricia's voice dropped. "I really am sorry about Commander Rawlings. He's not usually that direct," Sarah offered with a small smile. "I was going to say rude." Sarah found Captain Morrison's office easily. The door was open, and he was standing behind his desk, reviewing a thick binder. He was in his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the weathered look of someone who'd spent years at sea. His service dress blues hung on a coat rack in the corner, perfectly pressed, rows of ribbons telling the story of a distinguished career. Sarah knocked on the door frame. Morrison looked up, and his expression shifted immediately. His eyes widened slightly, Then his whole posture changed. He started to move as if to come to attention, then caught himself. "Admiral Chen," he said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. "Welcome to Norfolk." "Captain Morrison," Sarah replied just as quietly. She stepped into the office and closed the door behind her. "Thank you for accommodating this visit on such short notice." Morrison gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Of course, ma'am. Your office called 2 weeks ago to arrange it. I have to admit, I was surprised when they said you wanted to come in." "The operational efficiency review is real," Sarah said, sitting down. "But I wanted to see the base from a different perspective. See how things actually work when there's no Admiral stars announcing my arrival." Morrison nodded slowly. "And how's that going so far?" "Enlightening," Sarah said dryly. "I've been on base for 45 minutes. Your security procedures are solid. Petty Officer Johnson at the gate was professional and thorough. Patricia in your front office is excellent, organized, professional, trying to manage a chaotic environment. And Morrison could clearly tell there was more. "And Commander Rawlings just told me that we don't have time for some civilian contractor to wander around asking questions and getting in the way. He also suggested I was a waste of taxpayer money and implied that any woman with a laptop couldn't possibly understand how a naval base operates." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I apologize." "That's completely honest?" Sarah interrupted. "Captain, that's why I'm here in civilian clothes. I needed to see how this command actually functions when people think no one important is watching. And what I'm seeing is concerning." She leaned forward slightly. "Your deputy commander just dismissed a review that was requested by FleetCom, didn't check with you before turning away someone with proper credentials, and made assumptions based on—" She paused. "Well, let's just say based on factors that have nothing to do with competence or authority." Morrison looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. "Admiral, I can speak with Commander Rawlings immediately. This is unacceptable." "No," Sarah said firmly. "Not yet. I want to continue this review as planned. Let me see how the base operates for the next few days. Let me observe without the weight of rank-changing behavior." "But ma'am, Rawlings can't be allowed to." "Captain, how long has Commander Rawlings been your deputy?" 14 months. "And how would you characterize his performance?" Morrison hesitated. "Competent, detail-oriented, strong operational background. He's been frustrated about his promotion prospects. And that frustration, does it affect how he interacts with others?" Another hesitation. "He can be dismissive of support staff, civilian contractors, anyone he perceives as not understanding military culture, anyone he perceives as beneath him," Sarah corrected gently. Morrison didn't argue. "Captain, the IG inspection in 2 weeks isn't going to focus on whether your supply forms are filled out correctly. They're going to look at command climate, leadership effectiveness, and whether this base operates with the values we claim to uphold." Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. "And right now, I'm seeing a deputy commander who thinks he can dismiss people based on his assumptions rather than their credentials. That's a problem." "Yes, ma'am. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to continue this review as Sarah Chen, consultant. I want access to base operations, your supply chain management, personnel systems, all of it. I'll observe, take notes, conduct interviews. And when I'm done, we'll discuss what I've found." "And Commander Rawlings?" "Let him continue, believing I'm just an inconvenient contractor. Let's see how he operates when he thinks there are no consequences for his behavior." Morrison looked uncomfortable but nodded. "As you wish, Admiral." "Sarah," she corrected. "For the next week, I'm just Sarah. Can you work with that?" "It's going to be challenging, ma'am." "Good," Sarah said, standing. "Challenge builds character. Now, I need temporary workspace and access to your operational systems. Can Patricia set that up?" "Of course. There's an empty office in the logistics building. I'll have her get you established." Sarah moved toward the door, then paused. "Captain, for what it's worth, from what I've seen so far, you're running a good operation here, but there are cracks. And Commander Rawlings is one of them." After she left, Captain Morrison sat at his desk for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then he picked up his phone, and called Patricia. Patricia, Miss Chen is going to need workspace and full operational access. Treat her as a VIP contractor. Whatever she needs, you provide. And Patricia? Yes, Captain? Don't mention to Commander Rawlings that I've approved her review. Let him think she's just wandering around. Patricia was silent for a moment. Captain, is there something I should know about Miss Chen? Just that she has full authority to be here, and anyone who gets in her way is going to regret it. The temporary office in Building 12 was exactly what Sarah expected, a converted storage room with a metal desk, uncomfortable chair, and a computer that looked like it had been manufactured during the Clinton administration. But it had a door that closed, a window overlooking the supply depot, and most importantly, access to the base's operational systems. Patricia had been apologetic about the accommodations, but Sarah assured her it was perfect. If you need anything, ma'am, just call extension 4401. That's my direct line. Thank you, Patricia. You've been very helpful. As Sarah settled in, she pulled out her laptop, a secure, military-grade machine that looked no different from any contractor's device, but had access capabilities far beyond what Commander Rawlings would expect. She began by pulling up the base's operational reports for the past year. The numbers told a story. Supply requisitions were taking 47% longer to process than the fleet average. Equipment maintenance was falling behind schedule. Personnel turnover in key departments was running at twice the normal rate. And there were patterns in the data that suggested systemic problems, not just random inefficiency. Sarah was deep in a spreadsheet when someone knocked on her door. "Come in," she called without looking up. A young woman in utilities entered, her name tape reading, Martinez. Lieutenant Martinez, based on her collar insignia. Early 30s, with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. "Miss Chen? I'm Lieutenant Sophia Martinez." "Assistant Logistics Officer," Captain Morrison asked. "Me to check if you needed any operational background for your review." Sarah looked up and smiled. "Lieutenant Martinez. Any relation to Corporal Martinez who drove me from the airport?" Sophia's face lit up. "My younger brother. He mentioned driving a consultant this morning. Said you actually talked to him like a person. He seems like a good kid. Wants to be a pilot." "He does. I keep telling him the paperwork will be brutal, but he's determined." Sophia stepped fully into the office. "Ma'am, I have to say, we're all pretty curious about this operational efficiency review. We don't usually get civilian consultants. From what I understand, you're preparing for an IG inspection. I'm here to help identify any issues before the inspectors arrive." Sophia's expression shifted slightly, something between relief and concern. "Then you'll have plenty to look at. No disrespect to Captain Morrison, but we've got some challenges." "Such as?" Sophia glanced at the door, then lowered her voice. "Supply chain is a mess. We're using a procurement system that was designed for ships, not shore facilities, and no one seems to know how to make it work properly. We spend more time correcting paperwork errors than actually ordering supplies." "Who oversees procurement?" "Commander Rawlings, technically. But he delegates most of it to Chief Warrant Officer Hayes, who's—" Sophia paused, choosing her words carefully. "Let's just say Chief Hayes learned the system 30 years ago and refuses to adapt to any changes." Sarah made a note. "What else?" "Personnel management is creating bottlenecks. We've got sailors who should be training for advanced positions, stuck in entry-level roles because someone hasn't processed their paperwork. We've got equipment sitting idle because qualified technicians are tied up doing administrative tasks that civilians could handle. Commander Rawlings' area of responsibility." "Mostly, yes, ma'am." Sarah leaned back in her chair. "Lieutenant, can I ask you something off the record?" "Of course. How does Commander Rawlings typically respond when someone identifies a problem in his operations?" Sophia's expression answered before her words did. "He doesn't respond well to criticism, especially from junior officers. Or civilians. Or," she hesitated, "women?" Sarah supplied. "I didn't want to say it, but yes. Last month, Lieutenant Commander Williams from Engineering identified an issue with fuel storage procedures. She presented a detailed analysis showing we were wasting approximately $12,000 a month due to improper inventory tracking. Commander Rawlings told her she was overstepping and needed to focus on her own department. Was she overstepping? No, ma'am. She was trying to help. And she was right. The IG is going to hammer us on that fuel storage issue if we don't fix it. Sarah pulled up a file on her computer. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Williams, MIT Mechanical Engineering degree, 5 years, in nuclear propulsion. Currently the base's assistant engineering officer. Sophia looked surprised. You've already reviewed our personnel? I like to be prepared. Sarah scrolled through more files. She filed 3 separate reports about operational inefficiencies in the past 6 months. All dismissed or ignored by Commander Rawlings. How did you? Sophia stopped herself. I'm sorry, ma'am, but most contractors don't have that kind of access to personnel records. Sarah met her eyes steadily. I'm not most contractors, Lieutenant. Something shifted in Sophia's expression. A flash of curiosity, maybe even recognition. No, ma'am. I'm beginning to see that. Tell me about the base's safety record. We've had 3 reportable incidents in the past 4 months. Minor injuries, equipment damage. Nothing catastrophic. But trending in the wrong direction. Yes, ma'am. And the root cause analysis on those incidents? Sophia shifted uncomfortably. Commander Rawlings determined that all 3 were due to individual sailor error rather than systemic issues. Were they? Sophia chose her words carefully. I think the root causes were more complicated than that, but I'm just a lieutenant. What do I know? Sarah smiled slightly. Sometimes lieutenants see things that commanders miss, especially when commanders are too proud to admit there might be problems in their operations. A voice echoed from the hallway. Martinez. Where the hell are my supply reports? Sophia straightened. That's Commander Rawlings. I need to go, Sarah said. And Lieutenant? Thank you for your honesty. After Sophia left, Sarah pulled up the incident reports on her computer. 3 accidents in 4 months. Each blamed on individual error. Each occurring in areas that Commander Rawlings directly supervised. She began cross-referencing the reports with personnel evaluations, training records, and operational tempo data. Patterns emerged. Overworked personnel. Inadequate training time. Supervisors who were too busy with administrative tasks to properly mentor junior sailors. And through it all, Commander Rawlings's fingerprints, or rather, his absence. He was supposed to be ensuring operational excellence, but instead, he was creating an environment where problems were hidden rather than solved. Sarah was compiling her notes when her phone buzzed. A text from Captain Morrison. Rawlings just asked me who authorized the consultant. I told him Fleetcom wanted operational review before IG. He's not happy. She texted back. Good. Unhappy people make mistakes. Let him stay unhappy. The afternoon passed quickly. Sarah interviewed 3 more personnel, a chief petty officer from supply, a civilian contractor who managed IT systems, and a young ensign who was 3 months into his first assignment. Each conversation revealed more of the same pattern. Competent people trying to do good work while navigating a system that punished initiative and rewarded silence. At 1,700. As the day shift was ending, Sarah decided to walk the base. She changed into workout clothes, plain Navy PT gear she'd brought in her duffel, and headed toward the gym. It was a good way to observe the base culture without anyone paying attention to her. The gym was crowded with sailors finishing their workday, burning off stress with weights and cardio. Sarah found an open treadmill and started an easy run. Her ears open. 2 sailors on the rowing machines near her were talking. Inspection's going to be a disaster, one was saying. We've got so much shit broken or improperly documented. Rawlings says we'll be fine. Rawlings says a lot of things. Doesn't mean they're true. Careful, man. You know what happened to Petty Officer Jackson when he questioned Rawlings's judgment. Jackson was right, though. That maintenance schedule was screwed up, and now we're behind on 3 critical systems. Doesn't matter if he was right. Matters that Rawlings got pissed and Jackson ended up on night shift for 2 months. Sarah kept running, her pace steady, her expression neutral. But she was recording every word in her memory. After 45 minutes, she headed back toward Building 12 to collect her things. The base was quieter now, most personnel either heading home or to evening duty stations. The setting sun cast orange light across the concrete and steel. As she approached her temporary office, she saw Commander Rawlings standing in the doorway with Chief Warrant Officer Hayes. They were looking at something on a tablet, their expressions frustrated. "Don't care what the consultant says," Rawlings was saying. "This is how we've always done supply procurement, and it works fine. Sir, with respect, the error rate has been climbing," Chief Hayes replied. He was in his late 50s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in the Navy. "Maybe we should at least look at the recommendations." "What recommendations?" "She's been here one day. What could she possibly understand about our operations?" Rawlings looked up and saw Sarah approaching. His expression hardened. "Miss Chen." "Still here?" "Just collecting my laptop," Sarah said evenly. "I'll be out of your way in a moment." "Good. I'd hate for you to waste any more of our time." Sarah unlocked her office door and grabbed her laptop bag. As she turned to leave, Rawlings was still standing there, blocking part of the hallway. "Can I ask you something, Miss Chen?" he said, his tone condescending. "What exactly qualifies you to review naval operations? What's your background?" Sarah could have answered truthfully, could have watched his face crumble as she explained her 23 years of service, her combat deployments, her command experience. But that wasn't the point of this exercise. "I have a master's degree in organizational management from Stanford," she said calmly, "and 15 years of experience consulting with military installations on operational efficiency," all of which was technically true. Though she'd earned that master's degree while on active duty, and her consulting experience was actually her command experience viewed through a different lens. "Stanford." Rawlings laughed. "So you've got a fancy degree and you think that makes you qualified to tell us how to run a naval base? Let me guess you've never served a day in your life, have you?" Chief Hayes looked uncomfortable. "Sir, maybe we should—" "It's a simple question, Chief." Rawlings's eyes never left Sarah's face. "Have you ever worn the uniform, Miss Chen? Ever stood a watch? Ever been responsible for anything more significant than a PowerPoint presentation?" Sarah felt her jaw tighten. Every instinct screamed to put this arrogant officer in his place. But she maintained her composure. "I've been responsible for quite a few things, Commander," she said quietly. "More than you might imagine." "I doubt that." Rawlings stepped aside, finally letting her pass. "Enjoy your hotel, Miss Chen. Don't bother coming back tomorrow. I'll be speaking with Captain Morrison about terminating this review. We don't have time for civilian consultants who think they understand military life." Sarah walked past him without another word. But as she headed toward the parking lot where a car was waiting, Chief Hayes caught up with her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, looking over his shoulder to make sure Rawlings wasn't watching. "I apologize for the commander's behavior." "That wasn't appropriate." "It's fine, Chief." "No, it's not." Hayes's voice was firm. "I've been in the Navy for 34 years. I've served with a lot of officers, and I can tell when someone knows what they're talking about." He looked at her directly. "You might be wearing civilian clothes, ma'am, but you move like military. You ask questions like someone who's been there. And that comment about being responsible for things." He paused. "I don't know who you really are, but I suspect Commander Rawlings is going to regret how he spoke to you." Sarah smiled slightly. "Chief, do you know what the biggest problem I've identified so far on this base? Supply chain inefficiency? Personnel management? Maintenance backlogs?" "No," Sarah said quietly. "The biggest problem is that good people like you and Lieutenant Martinez and all the others I've talked to are afraid to speak up because you know you'll be punished for it. You've got solutions to problems, but you can't implement them because one man has created a culture where questioning his judgment is career suicide." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "You got all that in one day?" "I got that in one conversation, Chief. The rest just confirmed it." "So what happens now?" Sarah looked back at Building 12, where Commander Rawlings was visible through a window, still talking animatedly. "Now? Now I finish my review. I document everything. And then we'll see what happens when sunlight hits darkness." As Sarah climbed into the waiting car, Chief Hayes stood watching, a small smile on his face. He'd been in the Navy long enough to recognize something that Commander Rawlings had completely missed. That consultant wasn't just some civilian with a Stanford degree. She was someone who'd earned the right to judge them. Someone who understood military life from the inside. Someone who moved with the quiet confidence of authority that couldn't be faked. And Commander Rawlings had just made a very, very big mistake. Day 2 started the same way Day 1 had ended, with Commander Rawlings making his opinions known. Sarah arrived at Building 12 at 0630, early enough to observe the morning shift change but late enough not to draw attention. She'd spent the previous evening at her hotel reviewing operational data, cross-referencing maintenance logs with personnel assignments, and building a comprehensive picture of the base's actual efficiency versus its reported efficiency. The numbers were worse than she'd initially thought. As she settled into her temporary office, her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Morrison. Rawlings submitted formal complaint about your presence. Claims you're disrupting operations and lack proper authorization. I shut it down, but he's escalating. Be careful. Sarah smiled grimly and texted back. Let him escalate. I'm documenting everything. She was pulling up the base's communication protocols when she heard raised voices in the hallway. Commander Rawlings was talking to someone, his tone sharp with irritation. I don't care what Captain Morrison said. This consultant review is a waste of resources. We're 2 weeks from an IG inspection, and we're babysitting some civilian who thinks, sir, with respect, maybe she could help us prepare. That was Lieutenant Martinez's voice, carefully diplomatic. She identified 3 supply chain issues yesterday that we hadn't caught. Because she was snooping through systems she shouldn't have access to. She has full operational access, sir. Captain Morrison approved it. Morrison is too soft, always has been. If I were running this base, Rawlings stopped himself. Never mind. Just make sure that consultant stays out of critical areas. Last thing we need is her poking around and causing problems. Sophia's response was too quiet for Sarah to hear, but the frustration in it was evident even at a distance. Sarah returned to her work, pulling up the base's emergency response protocols. Standard procedures for fires, medical emergencies, security breaches, natural disasters. Everything looked appropriate on paper. But she'd learned long ago that protocols on paper and actual readiness were often 2 very different things. At 0800, she headed to the Base Operations Center, the nerve center where all communications and coordination flowed. It was housed in Building 3, a secure facility that required her contractor badge and an escort. The young sailor assigned to escort her was Petty Officer, 2nd Class Davis, a communications specialist who looked barely old enough to drive. He was professional but clearly curious about why a civilian consultant needed access to base operations. Ma'am, can I ask what you're reviewing? Davis asked as they walked across the base. Just so I know how to help. Communication efficiency, Sarah replied. How quickly information flows during normal operations and emergency situations. Oh, that's easy. During emergencies, it flows through Commander Rawlings. He's the designated incident commander for the base. Sarah made a mental note. And how often does the base run emergency drills? Davis hesitated. We're supposed to run them quarterly, but the last one was, I think 6 months ago? Maybe longer? Why the gap? Commander Rawlings said we were too busy with operational requirements to waste time on drills. He said real sailors should be able to handle emergencies without practice. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Emergency drills weren't about practice, they were about identifying weaknesses in systems before those weaknesses got people killed. The operations center was impressive, a room full of monitors displaying everything from weather patterns to ship movements to base security feeds. 6 sailors manned various stations, monitoring communications channels, tracking personnel locations, coordinating the daily business of running a major naval installation. The watch supervisor was a chief petty officer named Rodriguez, a woman in her early 40s with the calm competence of someone who'd seen everything twice. She looked up as Sarah entered. Chief Rodriguez, this is Miss Chen, the consultant reviewing our operations, Davis explained. Rodriguez stood and extended her hand. Ma'am, welcome to Ops. What can we show you? I'd like to understand your emergency response procedures. Walk me through what happens if, say, there's a fire in one of the maintenance facilities. Rodriguez pulled up a digital flowchart on one of the monitors. Fire alarm triggers automatically. Security dispatches the base fire team. Ops notifies the incident commander, Commander Rawlings, and activates the emergency response protocol. We establish communication with all department heads, secure affected areas, and coordinate response efforts. How long does that typically take? From alarm to full coordination? About 8 to 10 minutes. Sarah nodded, making notes on her tablet. And what if Commander Rawlings is unavailable? Rodriguez's expression flickered. Then it goes to Captain Morrison as base commander. What if Morrison is also unavailable? What's the backup chain? Rodriguez glanced at the other sailors in the room. We'd work it out, ma'am. Figure out who's senior and available. So there's no formal backup protocol documented? Not exactly, no ma'am. Sarah added that to her growing list of deficiencies. Chief, can you show me your communication logs from the past month? I want to see response times for various situations. Rodriguez pulled up the data, and Sarah spent the next hour reviewing it. The picture that emerged was concerning. Response times were inconsistent, communication chains were unclear, and in several instances, delays had occurred because personnel were waiting for Commander Rawlings to authorize actions that should have been handled at lower levels. She was discussing this with Rodriguez when alarms suddenly blared throughout the operations center. Every sailor in the room immediately shifted into high alert. Rodriguez spun to her primary monitor, her fingers flying across the keyboard. What do we have? Sarah asked, her voice calm but commanding. Fire alarm. Building 18, that's the main fuel storage facility. Rodriguez was already reaching for the phone. Automatic suppression system activated. Security and fire teams are responding. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Sarah moved to Rodriguez's side, watching the monitors. Building 18 was a critical facility. It stored fuel for vehicles, generators, and emergency systems. A fire there could be catastrophic. Get me visual on Building 18, Sarah said. Rodriguez glanced at her, surprised by the commanding tone, but complied. One of the large monitors switched to show security camera feeds from multiple angles around the fuel storage facility. Smoke was visible, pouring from the northern side of the building. But something was wrong. The automatic doors that should have closed to contain the fire were still open. And Sarah could see personnel, at least a dozen sailors, still inside the facility. Chief, why haven't those containment doors closed? Sarah asked sharply. They should have activated automatically when the alarm triggered. Rodriguez was typing rapidly. System shows. Jesus. System shows door mechanism is offline. Maintenance logs say it's been offline for 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Sarah's voice went cold. Why wasn't it repaired? I don't know, ma'am. That would be facilities maintenance. Commander Rawlings's area. Sarah's mind was already racing ahead, calculating scenarios, assessing risks. How many personnel are currently in Building 18? Manifests shows 15 sailors assigned to fuel operations for this shift. And do we have confirmation they all evacuated? Rodriguez was on the radio now. Building 18, this is base ops. Confirm personnel evacuation status. Static, then a panicked voice. Ops, this is Petty Officer Chen, Building 18 fuel supervisor. We've got a problem. Fire started in the northeast storage bay. We evacuated most personnel, but 3 sailors are trapped in the control room. Smoke is too thick, and the emergency exit is blocked by debris from a collapsed shelving unit. Sarah felt time slow down, the way it always did in a crisis. Her training, her experience, her instincts, everything that had been dormant for 8 months suddenly roared back to life. Chief, get me a layout of Building 18, she said, her voice sharp and clear. Rodriguez pulled it up immediately. Sarah studied it for 3 seconds, her eyes tracing ventilation systems, structural supports, alternate exits. The control room has an external vent system, Sarah said, pointing to the schematic. It's designed to maintain positive pressure to keep smoke out. If they can seal the door and activate that system, they'll have breathable air for approximately 20 minutes. But that external vent opens onto the east side of the building. Rodriguez stared at her. How do you know our fuel facility's ventilation specifications? I read the building schematics last night, Sarah said, which was true. She'd reviewed every critical facility on the base. Radio building. 18. Tell them to seal the control room door, activate emergency ventilation, and wait for extraction from the east side. Ma'am, I need to wait for Commander Rawlings to authorize. Chief. 3 sailors have, maybe 15 minutes before smoke overcomes them. We don't have time to wait for authorization. Make the call. Rodriguez hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, then keyed her radio. Building 18. Base ops. Seal yourselves in the control room and activate emergency ventilation. Help is coming to the east side external vent. Acknowledge. Roger, ops. Sealing control room now. Sarah turned to Davis. Get me Captain Morrison on the phone. Now. While Davis dialed, Sarah was already moving to the radio console. Base ops to Fire Team 1. What's your ETA to Building 18? Fire Team 1. ETA 3 minutes. We're approaching from the west side. Negative. Redirect to east side. 3 personnel trapped in control room. External ventilation vent is your extraction point. Roger that. Redirecting to east side. Davis handed Sarah the phone. Captain Morrison. Sir. Captain. This is Sarah Chen. We have a situation at Building 18. Morrison's voice was tense. I just heard the alarms. What's the status? Sarah gave him a 30-second briefing, concise, clear, prioritizing critical information. It was the kind of report she'd given 1,000 times during her career, and it came naturally despite the civilian clothes she wore. Understood, Morrison said when she finished. I'm en route to the scene. Who's running incident command? Currently, no one, sir. Commander Rawlings hasn't arrived yet, and someone needed to coordinate response immediately. Then continue coordinating until I arrive. I'm authorizing you to direct emergency response operations. Morrison out. Sarah handed the phone back to Davis and returned to the monitors. The fire team had reached the east side of Building 18. She watched as they positioned their ladder against the wall near the external vent. Building 18, base ops, she radioed. Fire team is in position. When they breach the external vent, you'll have approximately 60 seconds of heavy smoke infiltration before they can extract you. Stay low, cover your faces, and move quickly when they give the signal. Roger, ops, we're ready. The next 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Sarah coordinated fire suppression efforts, directed personnel to secure the surrounding area, and maintained communication with the trapped sailors. Her voice remained calm and steady, each command clear and precise. She was vaguely aware that the operations center had gone silent except for her voice and the radio chatter. Every sailor in the room was watching her, their expressions shifting from confusion to recognition to something that looked like awe. This wasn't how civilian consultants acted. This wasn't how anyone acted unless they'd commanded emergency operations before, unless they'd been trained for exactly this kind of crisis. The fire team breached the external vent. Smoke poured out in a thick black cloud. Then, one by one, 3 sailors emerged, coughing, covered in soot, but alive. Building 18 personnel extracted. The fire team leader reported, all 3 conscious and mobile. Paramedics are checking them now. Sarah felt her shoulders relax fractionally. Roger. Well done, Fire Team 1. Continue suppression operations on the main fire. Ma'am, Rodriguez said quietly beside her. The fire's under control. Suppression systems finally kicked in. Looks like initial estimates were wrong. It wasn't a fuel fire, just a storage area with cleaning supplies. Still dangerous, but not catastrophic. Good. Get me a preliminary damage assessment as soon as it's safe to enter. And Chief? Yes, ma'am? I want to know why those containment doors didn't close and why a critical safety system was offline for 3 weeks without being repaired. Rodriguez nodded. I'll pull the maintenance logs. The operations center doors burst open. Commander. Rawlings strode in, his face flushed, his uniform slightly disheveled. He'd clearly been somewhere off base and raced back when he got the emergency call. Status report. He barked. Who's running incident command? Every sailor in the room looked at Sarah. Rawlings followed their gazes, and his expression darkened. What the hell is going on here? Why is a civilian consultant in my operations center during an emergency? Sir. Miss Chen coordinated the response, Rodriguez said carefully. 3 sailors were trapped. She what? Took over my command? Rawlings's voice rose. This is unacceptable. This is a military installation, and in emergencies, command authority flows through Commander Rawlings. Captain Morrison's voice cut through the room like a knife. He'd entered quietly during Rawlings's tirade. Miss Chen was following my direct orders. I authorized her to coordinate emergency response until I could arrive on scene. Rawlings spun to face Morrison. Sir, with respect, this civilian had no business. This civilian just saved 3 sailors' lives, Morrison interrupted, his voice cold. While you were? Where were you, Commander? Rawlings's jaw worked. I was at a meeting off base. As soon as I got the alert, You were 45 minutes away. Miss Chen was here. She assessed the situation, coordinated response teams, and executed a successful rescue operation. Morrison moved to the monitor display, studying the camera feeds from Building 18. Chief Rodriguez, preliminary assessment? Fire contained, sir. 3 personnel extracted safely. Minimal structural damage. The fuel storage itself was never threatened. The fire was in an adjacent supply room. And the containment doors that failed to close? Maintenance logs show the door mechanism has been offline for 3 weeks, sir. Multiple work orders were submitted, but they were marked as low priority. Morrison turned slowly to face Rawlings. Low priority? Containment doors. On a fuel storage facility? Sir, we have limited maintenance resources. And there were higher priority. There is no higher priority than safety systems on a facility that stores enough fuel to level half this base if it ignites. Morrison's voice was dangerously quiet. We'll discuss this further in my office. Right now, I need you to oversee the post-incident assessment. Miss Chen, a word please. Sarah followed Morrison into the hallway outside the operations center. Once the door closed, Morrison let out a long breath. Admiral Chen, that was impressive. And terrifying. And I'm not sure I should have put you in that position. You didn't put me there, Captain. I was already there when the emergency happened. I did what needed to be done. And you did it like someone who's commanded emergency operations before. Morrison looked at her carefully. Anyone in that room with experience is going to recognize that you weren't reading from a manual. You were operating on instinct and training. Is that a problem? It's going to raise questions, especially from Commander Rawlings. Good, Sarah said. Let him ask questions. Let him wonder. Because right now, I need to understand how a critical safety system was offline for 3 weeks without anyone treating it as urgent. Morrison's expression hardened. So do I. By 1400 hours, word of the morning's emergency had spread throughout the base. Sarah could feel it in the way sailors looked at her as she walked across the facility, not with the dismissive glances of yesterday, but with curiosity, respect, and in some cases, suspicion. She'd returned to her temporary office to compile notes on the incident when Lieutenant Martinez appeared in her doorway. Miss Chen? Do you have a moment? Of course, Lieutenant. Come in. Sophia entered and closed the door behind her. She stood there for a moment, studying Sarah with an intensity that made it clear she was putting pieces together. That was remarkable. What you did this morning, Sophia said carefully. Most people would have frozen or waited for someone else to take charge. But you, she paused. You moved like someone who's done this before. Someone who's commanded people in crisis situations. I've consulted on emergency preparedness for several installations, Sarah said, which was technically true. No. Sophia shook her head. That's not what I saw. I've been in the Navy for 8 years, ma'am. I know what civilian consultants look like during emergencies. They observe. They take notes. They stay out of the way. She moved closer. You didn't observe, you commanded. You knew exactly what questions to ask, exactly what orders to give, exactly how to coordinate multiple teams under pressure. Sarah remained silent, letting Sophia work through it. And the way you analyzed that building schematic, Sophia continued, you didn't just read it, you understood it tactically. Ventilation systems, structural weak points, alternate extraction routes. That's not consultant knowledge, ma'am. That's military knowledge. Lieutenant, what are you asking me? Sophia met her eyes directly. I'm asking who you really are, because I don't think you're just Sarah Chen, consultant. I think you're someone important. Someone who came here to see how we actually operate when we don't know we're being watched. Sarah considered her response carefully. She'd been prepared for this moment, had known that her actions during the emergency would raise questions. The only question was how much to reveal. What I am, Sarah said quietly, is someone who cares about whether this base is ready for the IG inspection in 2 weeks. Someone who needed to see the truth rather than the carefully prepared facade that gets presented to visiting officials. And what truth have you found? That you have good people trying to do good work in a system that's failing them. That Commander Rawlings has created bottlenecks, ignored safety concerns, and prioritized his ego over operational effectiveness. Sarah's voice hardened. And that if I hadn't been in that operations center this morning, 3 sailors would be dead because a critical safety system was offline and no one treated it as urgent. Sophia's jaw tightened. We tried to escalate that maintenance issue. Multiple times. Commander Rawlings said it could wait until after the IG inspection. Do you have documentation of those escalation attempts? Yes, ma'am. Work orders, emails, even a memo from Chief Warrant Officer Hayes explaining why it was critical. I'll need copies of all of that. Sophia nodded. Ma'am, can I ask you something else? Go ahead. In the operations center, the way you gave orders, Captain Morrison called you afterward. And he addressed you as... Sophia paused. I was standing near the door. I heard him say Admiral Chen. Sarah's expression didn't change. Did you? Yes, ma'am. Which would make you? Sophia's eyes widened. Rear Admiral. Sarah Chen, Commander of Carrier Strike Group 3. Call sign Sparrow. Former F/A-18 pilot. 2 combat deployments. Navy Cross recipient for action in the Gulf. Sarah smiled slightly. You've done your homework, Lieutenant. Holy shit, Sophia breathed, then immediately straightened. I mean, ma'am, I apologize for the language. It's fine, Lieutenant, and yes, you're correct. But I need to know, can you keep this information to yourself for now? Of course, ma'am. But, may I ask why? Why not just arrive as an admiral? Why the civilian consultant cover? Because admirals get shown what people want them to see. Civilian consultants get to see what actually happens. Sarah gestured for Sophia to sit. I needed to know if the problems I was hearing about were real or exaggerated. I needed to see how this base functions when there's no brass watching. And I needed to understand whether Commander Rawlings was just having a bad day or whether he represents a systemic problem. And what have you concluded? That he represents a systemic problem, Sarah said flatly. A critical one. And that the IG inspection is going to expose it unless we fix it in the next 2 weeks. Sophia leaned forward. Ma'am, most of the junior officers and enlisted personnel know something's wrong. We don't have the authority to fix it, and when we try to escalate concerns, we get shut down. Not anymore, Sarah said. Lieutenant, I'm going to need your help. I need detailed documentation of every operational issue, every safety concern, every time someone tried to do the right thing and got blocked. Can you gather that for me? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Quietly, Sarah added. I don't want Commander Rawlings to know what we're building until it's too late for him to cover it up. Sophia's smile was fierce. Understood, ma'am. After Sophia left, Sarah pulled out her secure phone and sent an encrypted message to her deputy back at the strike group headquarters. Situation worse than expected. Emergency incident today revealed critical safety failures. Will need full documentation package prepared for IG. More to follow. The response came within minutes. Understood. Resources available if needed. Be careful, Admiral. Sarah was reviewing the morning's incident reports when Chief Warrant Officer Hayes knocked on her doorframe. Ma'am, do you have a minute? Of course, Chief. Please come in. Hayes entered, closed the door, and stood at a position that wasn't quite attention, but wasn't quite relaxed either. Ma'am, I owe you an apology. For what? For not speaking up sooner about the safety issues. I knew those containment doors needed repair. I submitted work orders. I escalated to Commander Rawlings 3 times. His voice was heavy with regret. But when he kept saying it could wait, I should have gone over his head. Should have gone directly to Captain Morrison. Chief, you followed the chain of command. That's what you're following. The chain of command isn't supposed to put sailors at risk, ma'am. Hayes met her eyes. I've been in the Navy for 34 years. I know the difference between proper procedure and covering your ass. And I chose wrong this morning. Sarah stood and moved around her desk to stand in front of Hayes. Chief, this morning, 3 sailors are alive because you maintained those maintenance logs meticulously, because you documented every attempt to get that safety system repaired. That documentation is going to be critical in understanding what went wrong and fixing it. But if you'd pushed harder, you probably would have gotten the same treatment as everyone else who questioned Commander Rawlings reassigned, given terrible evaluations, or drummed out of the service. Sarah's voice was firm. The problem isn't you, Chief. The problem is a system where doing the right thing requires going around your immediate superior. Hayes was quiet for a moment. Ma'am, I don't know if you're aware, but word is spreading about how you handled the emergency, about the questions you've been asking, about, he paused, about who you might really be, and what are people saying, that you're not just any consultant, that you moved with command authority, that you knew things only someone with military experience would know. Hayes smiled slightly. Petty Officer Davis has been telling everyone who'll listen that you're either former special operations or some kind of undercover inspector. What do you think, Chief? I think you're someone who's tired of good people getting punished for trying to do their jobs right, and I think Commander Rawlings is about to have a very bad day. Hayes straightened. Ma'am, whatever you need from me, documentation, testimony, evidence, it's yours. A lot of us have been hoping someone would finally pay attention. I'm glad it's you. After Hayes left, Sarah spent the next several hours buried in documentation. Hayes had provided her with a comprehensive file work orders dating back 6 months, emails showing repeated escalations of safety concerns, maintenance logs revealing a pattern of deferred repairs on critical systems. It painted a damning picture. Commander Rawlings had consistently prioritized administrative concerns over safety, delayed critical maintenance to meet budget targets, and silenced anyone who questioned his decisions. At 17:30, Captain Morrison called her office directly. Admiral, we need to talk. Can you come to my office? On my way, Captain. Morrison's office door was closed when Sarah arrived, which was unusual. She knocked, and his voice called out, "Come in." Inside, Morrison sat behind his desk, looking exhausted. "Please, close the door and have a seat." Sarah did both. "I just got off the phone with Fleetcom," Morrison said. "They've been following the reports of this morning's incident. They want a full investigation into the safety system failures." "Good. That's appropriate. They also," Morrison continued carefully, "have some questions about the civilian consultant who took command of emergency operations with the kind of precision that suggested extensive military experience. Did you tell them who I am? I confirmed that you have proper authorization to be here and that your actions this morning were appropriate and potentially life-saving." Morrison leaned back in his chair. "But Admiral, your cover is cracking. Too many people saw how you operated during that crisis. The questions are going to keep coming." "Let them come," Sarah said. "We're 6 days into this review, and I've already identified systemic failures that the IG is going to find in 2 weeks. The question now is whether we fix them or whether we let Commander Rawlings keep pretending everything's fine. You want to burn him. I want to protect this base and the sailors serving it," Sarah corrected. "If that means ending Rawlings's career, so be it. But Captain, this isn't personal. This is about ensuring operational readiness and safety." Morrison nodded slowly. "What do you need from me? For now, keep giving me access. Let me finish documenting the problems. And when the time comes, be prepared to take decisive action. And Rawlings? He's going to figure out something's wrong. He's already suspicious about why you're still here after he tried to have you removed." "Good," Sarah said. "Suspicious people make mistakes. And I'm counting on Commander Rawlings to make several more before this is over." The next morning, Sarah arrived at the base at 0600 to find a small group of sailors waiting near Building 12. As she approached, they straightened, not quite coming to attention, but showing respect. "Ma'am," one of them said. It was Petty Officer Chen, the fuel supervisor who'd been on duty during yesterday's fire. "We wanted to thank you for what you did yesterday." "You don't need to thank me, Petty Officer. I just coordinated the response." "No, ma'am." Chen's voice was firm. "You saved our lives. The 3 sailors trapped in that control room, one of them is my best friend. If you hadn't known about the external vent system, if you hadn't directed the fire team to the east side," he swallowed hard, "they wouldn't have made it." The others nodded agreement. Sarah recognized several faces, sailors she'd interviewed over the past few days, personnel who'd watched her operate during the emergency. "Ma'am," another sailor said quietly. This was Petty Officer Second Class Williams, one of the communications specialists from the operations center. "We know you're not just a consultant. The way you handled that crisis. Nobody moves like that without serious training and experience." Sarah looked at each of them, seeing the respect in their eyes, the hope that maybe, finally, someone with real authority was paying attention to their concerns. "What I am," Sarah said, carefully, "is someone who believes that every sailor in the United States Navy deserves to serve in an environment where safety is the priority, where raising concerns is encouraged rather than punished, and where leadership actually leads." She paused. "And I'm someone who's going to make sure that happens here." Petty Officer Chen smiled. "That's all we needed to hear, ma'am." As the group dispersed, Sarah felt the weight of their trust. These sailors didn't know her rank or her background, but they knew she'd acted when it mattered. And in the military, actions always spoke louder than credentials. She'd just settled into her office when her phone buzzed. A text from Lieutenant Martinez. "Emergency staff meeting called by Rawlings, 800 inches main conference room. He's pissed about something." Sarah texted back, "Should I attend?" He didn't specifically exclude contractors. "Might be interesting." At 0800, Sarah slipped into the back of the conference room. About 30 personnel were already assembled, department heads, senior enlisted, key staff officers. Commander Rawlings stood at the front, his expression thunderous. Captain Morrison sat off to the side, his face carefully neutral. "Let's get started," Rawlings said without preamble. Yesterday's incident at Building 18 was unacceptable. It made this command look incompetent, disorganized, and unprepared. The IG inspectors are going to hear about it, and they're going to use it as evidence of systemic failures. He clicked through a presentation slide. "So let me be clear about expectations going forward. All safety issues will be documented and addressed according to proper procedure. All maintenance concerns will be routed through the appropriate chain of command. And most importantly," he looked around the room, "personnel will not freelance during emergency situations. We have established protocols for incident command, and those protocols will be followed." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. He was using the incident to tighten control rather than address the underlying problems. "Sir," Lieutenant Commander Williams spoke up. She was the engineering officer Sophia had mentioned, the one who'd identified the fuel storage issue months ago. "With respect, if we'd followed established protocols yesterday, 3 sailors would have died." The civilian consultant identified a solution that the civilian consultant overstepped her authority. Rawlings interrupted sharply. She had no business directing emergency operations on a military installation. She was following Captain Morrison's direct orders, Williams said, her voice steady. "Yes. And we're going to discuss why Captain Morrison felt it necessary to give command authority to a civilian during a crisis on his own base." Rawlings's tone made it clear he considered that a failure of leadership. Morrison's expression didn't change, but Sarah saw his hands tighten on the arms of his chair. "Furthermore," Rawlings continued, "I've listened, reviewed the consultant's access logs. She's been examining personnel files, maintenance records, incident reports areas, well outside the scope of an operational efficiency review. As of today, her access is being restricted to administrative systems only." "On whose authority?" Morrison's voice was quiet but carried absolute command. Rawlings turned to face him. "Sir, with respect, this civilian has been disrupting operations for almost a week. She's interviewing our personnel, questioning our procedures, and now she's taken over emergency command. I believe it's time to terminate this review, and Commander Rawlings. Morrison stood slowly. Miss Chen's review was requested by Fleetcom. Her credentials and access were authorized by the Atlantic Fleet Command. And her actions yesterday saved 3 sailors' lives while you were off base at a meeting that, according to your calendar, wasn't mission critical. The room went silent. Sir, you're dismissed, Commander. Everyone, except Miss Chen, please clear the room. The assembled personnel filed out quickly, many of them stealing glances at Sarah as they passed. When the door closed, Morrison turned to her. Admiral, I apologize. That was inappropriate. Actually, Captain, that was perfect. Sarah moved to the front of the room. Commander Rawlings just revealed exactly what I needed to see. He's more concerned about control and appearances than he is about actual operational effectiveness or safety. Morrison rubbed his face tiredly. Fleetcom called again this morning. They want preliminary findings from your review by end of week. They'll have them. Sarah pulled out her tablet. Captain, I need to brief you on what I've found. It's worse than you think. For the next hour, Sarah walked Morrison through the evidence she'd compiled. The deferred maintenance on critical systems. The pattern of ignored safety concerns. The personnel who'd been punished for raising issues. The bottlenecks in supply, chain, and logistics that were directly attributable to Rawlings's management style. Jesus, Morrison said when she finished. I knew there were problems, but I didn't realize the scope. Because Rawlings is good at managing up, Sarah explained. He gives you reports that look acceptable. He blames problems on junior personnel or external factors. And he's created an environment where people are afraid to escalate concerns beyond him because they know they'll be punished. What's your recommendation? Relieve him of duty immediately, pending a formal investigation. Sarah's voice was firm. Captain, you have cause. The safety system failures alone are grounds. Add in the pattern of retaliation against personnel who raised concerns, and you have a clear case for removing him from command authority. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. If I relieve my deputy commander a week before the IG inspection, it's going to raise questions. Fewer questions than if the IG finds these same him problems and asks why you didn't address them. Sarah leaned forward. Captain, I know this is difficult. Rawlings is a fellow officer, but he's actively making this base less safe and less effective. And every day he remains in position is another day he can cause harm. Morrison met her eyes. You'll back me on this? You'll provide the documentation to support it? I'll provide everything you need. And Captain? Sarah's voice softened. You're not doing this alone. Fleetcom already knows about the safety system failures. They're watching. If you don't act, they will. Morrison nodded slowly. Then we do this properly. I want you to compile a formal report with all your findings. I want documentation of every incident, every ignored safety concern, every personnel complaint. I want it airtight so that when I relieve him, there's no question it was the right call. You'll have it by tomorrow morning. And Admiral? Morrison looked at her seriously. After this, your cover is done. Once I relieve Rawlings and cite your findings, everyone will know who you really are. Sarah smiled slightly. Good. I'm tired of being invisible anyway. That afternoon, Sarah worked with Lieutenant Martinez, Chief Hayes, and Lieutenant Commander Williams to compile the comprehensive report. They gathered in a secure conference room, spreading documents across the table, maintenance logs, work orders, personnel complaints, incident reports, financial records showing deferred maintenance to meet budget targets. This is damning, Williams said, reviewing a section about the fuel storage facility. We flagged this system as critical repair 3 times. Each time, Rawlings marked it as low priority, because fixing it would have required funds that he'd already allocated elsewhere, Hayes added. He was trying to come in under budget to make himself look good for his promotion board. Sophia pulled up an email chain. And look at this 2 months ago, Lieutenant Chen from Engineering reported a safety concern about electrical systems in Building 7. Rawlings responded by questioning his competence and threatening a negative evaluation. Where's Lieutenant Chen now? Sarah asked. Transferred to a ship deployment. Rawlings expedited his orders. Sophia's expression was grim. Classic retaliation. Question the commander. Get shipped out. Sarah made notes. We need to document this pattern. Every time someone raised a safety concern, what happened to them? Negative evaluations? Transferred? Extra duties? They worked through the afternoon, building a case that was thorough, documented, and undeniable. By 1800, Sarah had compiled a 40-page report with another 100 pages of supporting documentation. She was reviewing the final version when her office door opened without a knock. Commander Rawlings stood in the doorway, his face flushed with anger. "We need to talk," he said. Sarah set down her tablet calmly. "Commander, what can I do for you?" Rawlings stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "I know what you're doing. I know you've been gathering information, talking to my personnel, building some kind of case against me. I've been conducting the operational efficiency review I was sent here to conduct." "Bullshit." Rawlings moved closer, his voice low and intense. "You're not a consultant. I've checked with every major defense contractor. None of them have a Sarah Chen with your supposed credentials. You're someone else. Someone with an agenda." Sarah remained seated, her expression neutral. "And what agenda do you think I have? I think someone at FleetCom is trying to undermine me. Maybe because I speak my mind. Maybe because I don't play politics. Maybe because I actually care about maintaining standards rather than lowering them for diversity quotas and social engineering." "Interesting theory," Sarah said. "Is that what you think safety concerns are? Social engineering?" "I think a lot of these safety concerns are excuses from personnel who can't handle real Navy standards. And I think you're using a minor incident yesterday to try to make me look incompetent." "Commander, 3 sailors were nearly killed because a critical safety system was offline for 3 weeks. That's not minor. It would have been repaired before it became a real issue if certain people hadn't panicked and turned it into a crisis." Rawlings leaned against her desk, looming over her. "But that's what people like you do, isn't it? Find problems where there aren't any. Claim the sky is falling. Demand changes that make everything worse." Sarah stood slowly, and something in her movement made Rawlings step back slightly. She moved around the desk until she was standing directly in front of him, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight of command that made his eyes narrow. "People like me?" Sarah repeated softly. "What kind of person do you think I am, Commander? The kind who's never served, never sacrificed, never earned right to judge how a real naval installation operates. Is that so? You think I can't see through this consultant act? You're probably some political appointee's assistant, sent here to find ammunition for whatever crusade they're on. Well, let me tell you something, this base runs fine without interference from civilians who think they know better than officers who've dedicated their lives to the Navy." Sarah was silent for a long moment, her dark eyes holding Rawlings's with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Commander," she said finally, her voice quiet but carrying absolute authority. "You're relieved." Rawlings laughed. "Excuse me? You're relieved of duty, effective immediately. You'll report to Captain Morrison's office at 0800 tomorrow for formal notification, but as of right now, you no longer have command authority on this base. You don't have the authority to Commander Jack Rawlings." Sarah's voice cut through his protests like a blade. "You are addressing Rear Admiral Sarah Chen, Commander of Carrier Strike Group 3. And yes, I absolutely have the authority." The color drained from Rawlings's face. "For the past 6 days," Sarah continued, her voice carrying the weight of 23 years of service, "I have watched you prioritize your ego over sailor safety. I have documented your pattern of ignoring critical maintenance issues. I have interviewed personnel who were retaliated against for raising legitimate concerns. And yesterday, I watched 3 sailors nearly die because you decided a containment door mechanism wasn't a priority." Rawlings opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You question my right to judge how a naval installation operates," Sarah said, moving even closer. "I've commanded installations. I've commanded carrier air wings. I've commanded a strike group with 5,000 personnel and assets worth billions of dollars, and I've done it while maintaining the highest safety standards and operational readiness ratings in the fleet." She pulled her military ID from her pocket and held it up. The 3 stars gleamed in the fluorescent light. So yes, Commander, I've earned the right to judge. And my judgment is that you are unfit to serve in a command position. Rawlings stared at the ID, his face cycling through shock, anger, and growing horror as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. Admiral, I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Because you assumed a woman in civilian clothes couldn't possibly be anyone important. You assumed a civilian consultant couldn't possibly understand military operations. You assumed you could dismiss me, block my access, and make me go away. Sarah's voice was ice. You assumed wrong. She moved to her desk and picked up the phone. Captain Morrison, Commander Rawlings is in my office. I need you here now, please. Morrison arrived within 3 minutes, slightly out of breath. He took in the scene Rawlings, standing pale and shaken, Sarah radiating command authority in a way that made her civilian clothes irrelevant. Captain, Sarah said formally, I'm recommending immediate relief of Commander Rawlings from all command duties, pending formal investigation into safety violations, retaliation against personnel, and failure to maintain operational readiness standards. Full documentation will be on your desk by 0700. Morrison straightened. Recommendation accepted, Admiral. Commander Rawlings, you're relieved. Report to my office at 0800 tomorrow. Until then, you're confined to quarters. Turn in your base access credentials to security on your way out. Sir, I can explain, Commander. Morrison's voice was hard. The time for explanations is over. You're dismissed. After Rawlings left, Morrison turned to Sarah. Well, that's done. Your cover is definitely blown now. Good, Sarah said. We've got a week until the IG inspection. Let's make sure this base is actually ready for it. The news spread through Naval Station Norfolk like wildfire. By 0700 the next morning, every sailor on base knew that the civilian consultant who'd been walking among them for the past week wasn't a consultant at all. She was Rear Admiral Sarah Chen Sparrow, one of the most decorated female pilots in Navy history, a combat veteran with a Navy Cross, and the commander of one of the Atlantic Fleet's most powerful strike groups, and she'd just relieved the base's deputy commander from duty. Sarah arrived at Building 7 at 6:30, back in her service dress blues for the first time in a week. The uniform felt familiar, comforting even after days of civilian clothes. She'd spent the night at the base's flag quarters rather than her hotel, and she'd barely slept, working through documentation and preparing for the whirlwind that would follow Rawlings's relief. As she walked across the base, sailors who would have ignored her a day ago now stopped and rendered proper salutes. She returned each one with precision, noting the mixture of curiosity, respect, and nervousness in their faces. Word had spread about more than just her rank. Word had spread about everything: the emergency response, the investigation, the confrontation with Rawlings. The base was buzzing with energy, uncertainty, and something that felt like hope. Patricia was already at her desk when Sarah entered Building 7. The receptionist stood immediately, her eyes wide. "Admiral Chen," she said, her voice slightly breathless. I had no idea. I'm so sorry for any—" "Patricia, you were nothing but professional and helpful," Sarah interrupted gently. "You have nothing to apologize for. But I let Commander Rawlings treat you so dismissively. If you'd known, I wouldn't have gotten an accurate picture of how this base operates. You did your job exactly as you should have." Sarah smiled. "And for the record, that coffee warning on my first day was appreciated. It really was terrible." Patricia laughed, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. "Captain Morrison is waiting for you in his office, ma'am. And Admiral, if I may say, thank you for what you did during the fire, and for everything else." Sarah found Morrison in his office, reviewing the formal documentation she'd provided. He stood when she entered, and this time, he came to full attention. "Admiral on deck," he announced, even though they were alone. "At ease, Captain. Let's not stand on ceremony, we have work to do." Morrison relaxed slightly. "Admiral, this report is comprehensive. 43 documented safety violations, 17 instances of personnel retaliation, systemic failures in maintenance protocols, supply chain inefficiencies." He shook his head. "When I read it all together like this, I feel like I failed these sailors. You didn't fail them, Captain. You were managing a large installation while dealing with a deputy who was actively concealing problems from you. That's not failure, that's being undermined by someone you trusted. Still, I should have seen it sooner. Maybe. But you're seeing it now, and that's what matters. Sarah sat down. Captain, FleetCom is sending a team today. They want to review the findings and determine next steps. But before they arrive, I need your assessment. How quickly can we remediate the critical issues? Morrison pulled up a spreadsheet. I've already started. The containment door mechanism at Building 18 is being repaired today, emergency priority. I've got Lieutenant Commander Williams doing a full audit of all safety systems on base. Chief Hayes is reviewing the entire maintenance backlog with authority to approve critical repairs immediately, regardless of budget. Good. What about personnel? That's more complicated. At least a dozen sailors filed formal complaints against Rawlings over the past year. Those complaints were buried or dismissed. They'll need to be reviewed properly, and people will need to know their concerns are being taken seriously. Assign someone to handle that, someone the junior personnel trust. Lieutenant Martinez, maybe. Morrison nodded, making notes. Admiral, there's something else. Morale has been complicated. Some personnel are relieved that Rawlings is gone. Others are nervous about what comes next. And there's uncertainty about whether the IG inspection will still happen or whether your presence means it's been canceled. The inspection is still happening, Sarah said firmly. And it needs to happen. FleetCom needs to verify that we've actually fixed these problems, not just papered over them. She leaned forward. Captain, I'm not here to make this easy for you. I'm here to make sure this base operates the way it should. And that means accepting scrutiny, welcoming accountability, and proving that we can do better. Understood, ma'am. Now, I need to address the base. All hands meeting, this afternoon if possible. I want everyone to hear directly from me about what's happened and what comes next. Morrison checked his schedule. I can make that happen. 1,400 hours in the main auditorium? Perfect. By 1,000 hours, Sarah had conducted 3 separate meetings, one with department heads, one with senior enlisted leadership, and one with the junior officer corps. In each meeting, she'd been direct, honest, and clear about expectations. Here's the situation, she'd told them. For the past week, I observed how this base operates when no one knew an admiral was watching. I found serious problems, safety violations, personnel issues, systemic inefficiencies. But I also found dedicated sailors trying to do their jobs right despite those obstacles. She'd paused, letting that sink in. Commander Rawlings has been relieved because he failed to maintain the standards we require in the United States Navy. But this isn't about punishing one officer. This is about fixing a broken system. And I need all of you to help me do that. The responses had been overwhelmingly positive. Relief, mostly. And determination. These were good people who'd been trapped in a bad situation, and now someone with real authority was giving them permission to fix it. At 1,130, Sarah was walking through the supply depot with Chief Hayes, reviewing maintenance protocols, when a young sailor approached hesitantly. Admiral Chen? It was Petty Officer Chen, the fuel supervisor from the fire. Ma'am, do you have a moment? Of course, Petty Officer. Chen glanced at Chief Hayes, who took the hint and stepped away to give them privacy. Ma'am, I just wanted to say. Chen struggled for words. When you were here as the consultant, you talked to me about the fuel storage procedures. You actually listened to my concerns about the safety systems. You didn't dismiss me or tell me I was overreacting. Because you weren't overreacting. Your concerns were valid. But Commander Rawlings had told me 3 times that I was being paranoid, that the containment doors were fine, that I needed to focus on my actual job instead of worrying about hypothetical problems. Chen's voice tightened. And then those hypothetical problems almost killed 3 of my friends. That should never have happened, Petty Officer. And it won't happen again. Chen met her eyes. Ma'am, there are a lot of us junior enlisted especially, who felt like nobody was listening, like our concerns didn't matter because we were too low ranking to have valid opinions. What you did this week, coming here without your stars, actually talking to us like people. He swallowed hard. That meant something. It still means something. Sarah felt emotion tighten her throat. This was why she'd done it this way. Not for the satisfaction of catching Rawlings, but to understand what it felt like to be the sailors at the bottom of the chain of command, the ones who saw problems firsthand, but had no power to fix them. Your concerns always mattered, petty officer, Sarah said quietly. I'm just sorry it took someone coming in from outside to make that clear. More sailors approached throughout the morning. Some thanked her. Some shared their own stories of concerns dismissed or reports ignored. Some just wanted to be seen, acknowledged, heard. By lunchtime, Sarah understood the depth of the problem. It wasn't just Rawlings. It was a culture that had developed over months, maybe years, where junior personnel learned to stay silent because speaking up only brought punishment. That culture needed to change. And change had to start at the top. At 1,400 hours, the base auditorium was packed. Every seat filled, sailors standing along the walls, people crowding in the doorways. Captain Morrison had estimated 500 personnel would attend. Over 800 showed up. Sarah stood backstage with Morrison, watching the crowd settle. They're here because they want to understand what happens next, Morrison said quietly. And because they want to hear it directly from. No pressure then, Sarah replied, with a slight smile. Admiral, you commanded a carrier air wing in combat. You directed strike operations against enemy targets. I think you can handle a speech. Combat is easier, Sarah said. At least in combat, everyone agrees on who the enemy is. Morrison looked at her curiously. And here? Here, the enemy is complacency. Fear. The belief that speaking up will only make things worse. Sarah straightened her uniform. That's harder to fight than any external threat. At precisely 1,400, Captain Morrison walked onto the stage. The crowd immediately quieted. Attention on deck, Morrison called out. 800 sailors rose to their feet. Ladies and gentlemen, Rear Admiral Sarah Chen, commander of Carrier Strike Group 3. Sarah walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. It started with the sailors who'd been in the operations center during the fire. They stood and clapped with fierce pride. Then it spread to those who'd been interviewed during her review, who'd seen her actually listen to their concerns. Then to the broader base population, who'd heard the stories, who understood what she'd done. The applause continued for nearly a minute. Sarah stood at the podium, feeling the weight of their expectations, their hope, their trust. Finally, she raised her hand for quiet. The room settled. At ease. Please. Sit down. 800 sailors sat. Sarah looked out at the sea of faces, young and old, enlisted and officer, representing every rate and specialty in the Navy. A week ago, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, I arrived at this base wearing civilian clothes and calling myself a consultant. I did that because I needed to see how Naval Station Norfolk actually operates, not the carefully prepared version that gets shown to visiting admirals, but the real, day-to-day reality of serving here. She paused. What I found was concerning. Safety systems offline. Maintenance deferred. Personnel afraid to raise legitimate concerns because they knew they'd be punished for it. A deputy commander who prioritized control and appearance over actual operational effectiveness. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. But I also found something else. I found dedicated sailors trying to do excellent work despite those obstacles. I found chiefs and petty officers maintaining meticulous records even when they knew those records would be ignored. I found junior officers trying to protect their people while navigating a system that punished initiative. Sarah's voice grew stronger. I found people like Petty Officer Chen, who raised safety concerns 3 times and was told he was paranoid. Like Lieutenant Commander Williams, who identified critical fuel storage issues and was told she was overstepping. Like Chief Hayes, who documented every maintenance problem and was told it could wait. She saw those individuals in the crowd, saw them sitting straighter, feeling acknowledged. You were right, Sarah said directly to them. All of you who raised concerns, who documented problems, who tried to do the right thing even when it was hard, you were right. And Commander Rawlings was wrong. Not just wrong, but dangerously wrong. The auditorium was completely silent now. Yesterday, 3 sailors nearly died because a critical safety system had been offline for 3 weeks. That should never have happened. And it never would have happened if legitimate concerns hadn't been systematically dismissed and ignored. Sarah gripped the podium. Commander Rawlings has been relieved of duty. He'll face a formal investigation, and the evidence I've compiled will be provided to the appropriate authorities. But this isn't just about one officer. This is about a culture that needs to change. She looked around the room, meeting eyes. From today forward, here's how this base will operate. Safety concerns will be treated as urgent until proven otherwise. Maintenance issues will be prioritized based on actual risk, not budget convenience. Personnel who raise legitimate concerns will be thanked, not punished. And leadership at every level will be held accountable for creating an environment where doing the right thing is rewarded, not discouraged. Applause began again, but Sarah raised her hand. I'm not finished. Because accountability goes both ways. I need all of you to hold up your end. If you see a problem, report it. If something isn't right, speak up. Don't wait for someone else to notice. Don't assume it's not your responsibility. This base belongs to all of us, and we all have a duty to maintain it properly. She softened her tone slightly. I know change is uncomfortable. I know some of you are nervous about the IG inspection next week. Good. Nervous means you care. Nervous means you'll double-check your work, verify your procedures, make sure everything is actually right rather than just appearing right. Sarah smiled. Slightly. The IG inspectors are going to find problems. That's their job. But they're also going to find a base that's actively fixing those problems, that's committed to improvement, and that's putting sailor safety above everything else. And that matters more than a perfect score. She straightened. One more thing. During my week here, as a consultant, many of you helped me. You shared information honestly. You answered questions thoroughly. You showed me who you really are when you thought no one important was watching. Sarah's voice carried emotion. Thank you. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your courage. And thank you for reminding me why I love serving in the United States Navy. The applause this time was deafening. Sailors rose to their feet, clapping, some cheering. Sarah saw tears on some faces, saw relief and pride and hope. As the noise continued, something happened that Sarah hadn't expected. In the front row, a SEAL stood up. Senior Chief Petty Officer, Marcus Webb, assigned to the base's Special Warfare Unit. He'd been one of the people she'd interviewed early in her review, a quiet professional who'd shared concerns about safety protocols during training exercises. Webb came to attention and rendered a salute. Not the casual, routine salute of daily military life, but a deliberate, meaningful gesture of respect. "Hoo-yah, Admiral," he said, his voice cutting through the applause. "Thank you for having our backs." The sailor next to him stood and saluted. Then another, then a whole row. Within seconds, the entire auditorium was on its feet, 800 sailors standing at attention, rendering salutes with a precision and sincerity that made Sarah's throat tighten. She stepped back from the podium and returned the salute, holding it, letting herself feel the weight of this moment. This wasn't just protocol. This wasn't just tradition. This was 800 sailors saying, "We see you. We recognize what you did. You earned this." Respect not through rank alone, but through actions. The salute held for 10 seconds that felt like an eternity. Then, Sarah lowered her hand, and the crowd erupted again. Applause, mixed with voices, calling out thanks, appreciation, determination. Captain Morrison stepped forward to dismiss the formation, but Sarah could barely hear him over the noise. As sailors began filing out, many made detours to the stage not to approach her directly, but to be near, to be part of this moment of transformation. Sarah stood watching them, feeling the emotion of it wash over her. In 23 years of service, she'd received medals, commendations, formal recognition from senior leaders. But this moment, this spontaneous, genuine expression of respect from the sailors she'd come to protect, this meant more than any medal ever could. As the auditorium slowly emptied, Lieutenant Martinez approached the stage. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her smile was fierce. "Ma'am, that was..." Sophia struggled for words. "That was exactly what we needed to hear." "I meant every word, Lieutenant. I know you did. We all know." Sophia glanced back at the still departing crowd. Admiral, you just changed everything. People are actually believing that things can get better, that their concerns matter. That speaking up won't destroy their careers. Now comes the hard part, Sarah said, actually making good on those promises. We'll help, Sophia said firmly. Everyone will help. You'll see. The antagonist's moment authority humbled Commander Rawlings sat in a small conference room in Building 7, his service dress blues perfectly pressed but his face haggard. It was 0800 the following morning, and he was waiting for his formal notification of relief and the preliminary investigation briefing. The past 24 hours had been surreal. After leaving Sarah's office, he'd returned to his quarters in a daze. He'd tried to call colleagues, to explain, to build support, but word had already spread, not just about his relief, but about why. The safety violations, the ignored maintenance, the retaliation against personnel, the 3 sailors who'd nearly died. No one wanted to be associated with him now. The door opened, and Captain Morrison entered, followed by Admiral Chen and a Navy JAG officer, Lieutenant Commander Ross, according to his name tag. "Attention on deck," Morrison said formally. Rawlings stood, coming to attention. But his eyes were on Sarah, and the bitterness there was palpable. "Commander Rawlings, be seated," Morrison said. They all sat, Morrison and Sarah on one side of the table, Rawlings on the other, with the JAG officer at the head taking notes. Morrison opened a folder. "Commander Jack Rawlings, you are hereby formally relieved of all duties as Deputy Commander of Naval Station Norfolk, effective immediately. This relief is based on multiple factors, including but not limited to failure to maintain operational safety standards, documented patterns of retaliation against personnel, and dereliction of duty in addressing critical maintenance issues." Rawlings's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "A formal investigation is being initiated," Morrison continued. "You'll be assigned temporary administrative duties pending the outcome of that investigation. Your security clearances are being reviewed, and you are hereby ordered not to contact any personnel at this installation except through official channels." "Understood, sir," Rawlings said, his voice tight. Morrison slid the folder across the table. "These are the formal notification documents. You'll need to sign and date each page." As Rawlings reviewed the documents, his hands trembled slightly. This was his career ending in real time. 20 years of service, reduced to a relief of duty order, and an investigation that would almost certainly end in early retirement at best, court-martial at worst. He signed each page mechanically, his face growing more red with each signature. When he finished, he looked up at Sarah, and the carefully controlled facade cracked. "You destroyed me," he said, his voice shaking. "You came here with an agenda, set me up, and destroyed my career." "No, Commander," Sarah replied calmly. "You destroyed your career. I simply documented what you'd already done. I was doing my job, managing a complex installation with limited resources and impossible demands. Yes, I had to make hard choices about priorities. Yes, I had to maintain discipline. But I never intended for anyone to get hurt. Intent doesn't matter when 3 sailors nearly die because you ignored safety concerns for 3 weeks, Sarah said, her voice hard. Intent doesn't matter when junior personnel are afraid to report problems because they know you'll retaliate. Intent doesn't matter when you create a culture where covering up issues is rewarded and speaking up is punished. You don't understand the pressure, the IG inspection, the budget constraints, the constant scrutiny. I understand perfectly, Commander. I've commanded installations larger than this one, with more complex operational requirements, under greater scrutiny. Sarah leaned forward. And I never sacrificed sailor safety to make my numbers look good. I never retaliated against people for raising concerns. And I never, ever, created an environment where people were afraid to tell me the truth. Rawlings's face crumpled. I didn't mean for it to become that. I just wanted things to run smoothly. I wanted to prove I could handle command authority. I wanted to show them I deserved that promotion to captain. By cutting corners on safety? Morrison asked, his voice carrying disappointment. By silencing anyone who questioned your judgment? Jack, I trusted you. I gave you responsibility, authority, latitude to make decisions, and you abused that trust. Sir, I can fix this. Give me another chance. There are no second chances when lives are at risk, Morrison said flatly. The investigation will determine what additional consequences you'll face. But your time in command authority is over. Rawlings turned back to Sarah, and his expression shifted from desperation to anger. You enjoyed this, didn't you? Coming in undercover, watching me make mistakes, building your case, playing some kind of game while pretending to be a harmless consultant. This wasn't a game, Commander. Wasn't it? The famous Sparrow, testing out her investigative skills, seeing if she could catch an officer making mistakes. Well, congratulations, Admiral. You won. You exposed every flaw, every misstep, every hard decision I made under impossible circumstances. Sarah's expression didn't change. Commander, do you know what I found most revealing during my time here? I'm sure you'll tell me. I found that almost every person I interviewed, from petty officers to chiefs to lieutenant commanders, had legitimate concerns they wanted to raise. But they didn't bring them to you because they knew you'd dismiss them, belittle them, or punish them. Sarah's voice was quiet but devastating. You created an environment where people would rather stay silent and risk disaster than speak up and face your anger. That's not leadership, Commander. That's tyranny. Rawlings flinched at the word. And the saddest part? Sarah continued, you're not a bad person. You're not corrupt or malicious. You're just an officer who let his pride and ambition override his judgment, who convinced himself that being right was more important than being safe, who forgot that leadership isn't about control, it's about trust. The room was silent for a long moment. Commander Rawlings, the JAG officer, spoke for the first time. You'll report to Building 14, Room 203, at 1300 today. That's where you'll be assigned administrative duties for the duration of the investigation. You're prohibited from entering operational spaces without escort. Do you understand these restrictions? Yes, sir, Rawlings said quietly. Do you have any questions about the relief order or the investigation process? No, sir. Morrison stood. Then you're dismissed, Commander. Rawlings rose slowly. He looked at Morrison, then at Sarah. For a moment, it seemed like he might say something else, apologize, explain, justify. But instead, he simply rendered a salute that Morrison returned. Then Rawlings turned and walked out, his posture defeated, his career in ruins. After the door closed, Morrison let out a long breath. That was harder than I expected. It always is, Sarah said. He's still a fellow officer, still someone who served honorably for most of his career. But that doesn't change what needed to happen. The JAG officer gathered his notes. Admiral, the investigation will take approximately 2 weeks. Based on the documentation you've provided, I expect we'll recommend administrative separation at minimum, possibly court-martial, depending on what else we uncover. Whatever the evidence supports, Commander Ross, I want this done properly and thoroughly. After Ross left, Morrison sat back down heavily. Do you think he understands, really understands why this happened? Eventually, maybe, Sarah said. Right now, he's too focused on what he's lost. But someday, he might look back and recognize that his choices led here. That if he'd listened to those safety concerns, if he'd created a better culture, if he'd led instead of controlled. She shrugged. This could have been avoided. What happens to him now? That depends on the investigation. But realistically, his Navy career is over. Best case, he retires quietly with a general discharge. Worst case, court-martial and possible jail time if they find criminal negligence in the safety violations. Morrison was quiet for a moment. He called you vindictive, said you enjoyed destroying his career. People always say that. When they're caught, Sarah replied. They want to believe someone set them up rather than accept responsibility for their own actions. It's easier to be angry at me than to acknowledge that 3 sailors nearly died because he ignored their safety concerns. For the record, Admiral, I don't think you enjoyed any of this. Sarah smiled slightly. No, Captain, I didn't. But I also don't regret it. Because if I hadn't been here, if I hadn't seen the truth, how long would it have continued? How long before those ignored safety concerns actually got someone killed? Morrison nodded slowly. You're right. I've known Jack for 5 years. Served with him on 2 different assignments. It's hard to reconcile the officer I thought I knew with what he became here. Command pressure changes people, Sarah said. Some rise to it, others crack under it. The trick is identifying which is happening before it's too late. She stood. Now, let's talk about who's going to fill the deputy commander role while you search for a permanent replacement. I was hoping you'd have recommendations. I do. Lieutenant Commander Williams, for acting deputy. She's got the operational background, the respect of the crew, and the judgment to handle it. Temporary assignment until FleetCom sends a permanent replacement. Morrison considered it. She's only an 04. That's junior for deputy commander. And she's ready. Sometimes the best leaders are the ones who've been waiting for permission to lead. Sarah headed toward the door. Trust me on this, Captain. Williams won't let you down. 7 days later, the IG inspection team arrived at Naval Station Norfolk. Sarah stood with Captain Morrison and Lieutenant Commander Williams, now officially serving as acting deputy commander, as the inspection team's leader, Captain Theodore Marsh, reviewed his preliminary findings. Well, Marsh said, looking up from his tablet. This is unusual. How so, Captain? Morrison asked. Usually when we arrive at an installation, we spend the first 2 days uncovering problems that people tried to hide. Here? Marsh gestured at his tablet. You've already identified the problems, documented them, and begun remediation. You've actually made our job easier. We had some help with that, Morrison said, glancing at Sarah. Marsh smiled. Yes, I heard Admiral Chen spent a week here undercover. Very thorough work, ma'am. Your documentation has been invaluable. Thank you, Captain. But the credit belongs to the sailors who were willing to speak up once they knew someone was listening. Over the next 3 days, the IG team conducted their comprehensive review. They interviewed personnel, examined systems, reviewed maintenance logs, and assessed operational readiness. Sarah observed from a distance, letting Morrison and Williams handle the day-to-day interactions while she focused on strategic oversight. What she saw impressed her. The base had transformed. Not perfectly, there were still problems to solve, systems to improve, personnel issues to address. But the culture had shifted dramatically. People were raising concerns instead of hiding them. Department heads were prioritizing safety over appearance. And most importantly, junior sailors were speaking up without fear of retaliation. On the second day of the inspection, Sarah was walking through Building 18, the fuel storage facility, where the fire had occurred when she encountered Petty Officer Chen conducting a thorough safety inspection with 2 other sailors. Admiral on deck. Chen called out, and his team snapped to attention. As you were, Sarah said. Petty Officer, what are you working on? Ma'am, we're conducting weekly safety checks on all critical systems. It's a new protocol that Commander Williams implemented. Chen gestured to a detailed checklist. Every system gets inspected weekly, with immediate escalation if anything is even slightly off. How's it going? So far so good, ma'am. We found a minor issue with a pressure valve yesterday, reported it immediately, and it was repaired within 4 hours. Chen smiled. It's nice to know that when we raise concerns now, they're actually addressed. That's how it should always work, Petty Officer. One of the other sailors, a young woman whose name tape read Harrison, spoke up hesitantly. Admiral Chen? Ma'am, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you do it? Come here undercover, I mean. You're an admiral, you could have just shown up and ordered an investigation. Sarah considered the question carefully. Because sailors behave differently when an admiral is watching. People show you what they want you to see rather than what actually is. I needed to see the truth, and the only way to do that was to be invisible. But you weren't invisible, Harrison said. Everyone I talked to remembered you. The consultant who actually listened, who asked real questions, who treated people with respect even though we thought you were just a civilian. That's because rank doesn't determine respect, Sarah replied. Character does. And every sailor here, regardless of rank, deserves to be heard and respected. Harrison nodded thoughtfully. Ma'am, that week you were here as a consultant? When you talked to us like we mattered even though you didn't have stars on your collar? That taught us more about leadership than any manual ever could. Sarah felt emotion tighten her throat. Thank you, Petty Officer. That means a great deal. On the final day of the inspection, Captain Marsh called a closeout briefing. Morrison, Williams, department heads, and senior enlisted leadership gathered in the main conference room. Sarah sat off to the side, observing. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marsh began, "I am pleased to report that Naval Station Norfolk has passed this inspection with an overall rating of satisfactory with commendations." Relief rippled through the room. "However," Marsh continued, "I want to be clear about what that means. We found numerous issues, maintenance backlogs, procedural gaps, training deficiencies. In a normal inspection, those findings would have resulted in a much lower rating." The room tensed. But what made the difference was your response. You didn't hide the problems. You didn't make excuses. You documented everything, began immediate remediation, and demonstrated a genuine commitment to improvement. Marsh looked at Morrison. "Captain, you inherited a challenging situation. The relief of your deputy commander just before our inspection could have been disastrous. Instead, you turned it into an opportunity for transformation." Morrison nodded. "We had excellent guidance, sir." Marsh glanced at Sarah. "Yes, I understand Admiral Chen's review was quite thorough. In fact, her documentation was so comprehensive that we've recommended it be used as a template for future operational efficiency reviews across the fleet." After the briefing concluded, personnel filed out, many stopping to congratulate Morrison and Williams. Sarah was gathering her materials when Senior Chief Webb approached. "Admiral, do you have a moment?" "Of course, Senior Chief." Webb glanced around, ensuring they had relative privacy. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know something. My team, the SEAL unit based here, we've been on dozens of installations, and we've seen every kind of leadership, good, bad, and everything in between. And what you did here, ma'am, that was exceptional. Not the investigation itself, but the way you did it. You could have come in as an admiral, thrown your weight around, relieved Rawlings on day one, and called it done. Instead, you took the time to understand the real problems, to hear from the people actually affected, to build a case that was thorough and fair." Webb's expression was serious. "That takes integrity, ma'am, and humility. And those qualities are rare at flag rank. Thank you, Senior Chief. That means a great deal coming from you." "There's something else," Webb continued. "My team runs training operations with junior sailors sometimes, teaching them about leadership under pressure, decision-making in crisis situations. Would you be willing to speak to them? Not about tactics or strategy, but about what you did here, about leading with integrity." Sarah smiled. "I'd be honored." That afternoon, Sarah found herself in a small classroom with 24 young sailors, enlisted personnel, all under 25, all eager and nervous about meeting an admiral. "At ease," she said as she entered. "This isn't a formal brief. I just want to talk to you about something important." She perched on the edge of the desk at the front of the room, deliberately casual. For the past 2 weeks, this base has been talking about the civilian consultant who turned out to be an admiral. About how I came here undercover and relieved the deputy commander. Some of you probably think that was some clever investigative trick, maybe even heroic. She paused. But here's what I want you to understand. There was nothing heroic about what I did. I had rank, authority, and resources. I had the power to walk in here and demand answers. What took courage, real courage, was what all of you did every day before I arrived. The sailors looked confused. Petty Officer Chen raised safety concerns 3 times, knowing he'd be dismissed. Chief Hayes documented every maintenance issue, even when those documents were ignored. Lieutenant Martinez continued trying to fix supply chain problems, despite being told she was overstepping. Lieutenant Commander Williams kept identifying operational inefficiencies even after being publicly reprimanded. Sarah's voice grew stronger. That's courage. Speaking up when you have no power. Doing the right thing when it might cost you everything. Maintaining integrity when it would be easier to stay silent. She looked around the room at their young faces. Leadership isn't about rank. It's not about having authority or giving orders. Leadership is about character. It's about doing what's right even when it's hard, even when it's unpopular, even when it costs you something. One sailor raised his hand. Ma'am, but what if speaking up gets you in trouble? What if your chain of command doesn't want to hear it? Then you document everything and you keep trying. You escalate through proper channels. You maintain records. And if those channels fail, you find someone who will listen. Sarah's expression was serious. I'm not telling you to be insubordinate or to bypass your chain of command lightly. But I am telling you that there's a difference between following orders and following illegal or unsafe orders. And you have a duty, a moral duty, to speak up when something is genuinely wrong. Another sailor spoke up. But ma'am, you're an admiral. It's easy for you to say that now. But when you were junior, did you really speak up? Or are you just telling us what we want to hear? Sarah smiled at the one. Directness of the question. Fair question. Yes, I spoke up. When I was a lieutenant flying FA 18 seconds, I reported a maintenance issue that my squadron commander told me to ignore. He said the aircraft was good enough for the training mission. I refused to fly it and documented my concerns. What happened? I got a letter of counseling in my service record. My fitness report that cycle was mediocre, and I was passed over for early promotion to lieutenant commander. Sarah paused. But 6 weeks later, another aircraft with the same maintenance issue crashed, killing the pilot. The investigation found that multiple people had noticed the problem but hadn't spoken up, and I realized that the letter of counseling in my record was a badge of honor, not a black mark. The room was silent. So yes, Sarah continued, speaking up has costs. Sometimes real costs, but the cost of staying silent when lives are at risk, that's always higher. A third sailor asked, Ma'am, what about Commander Rawlings? Do you feel bad about ending his career? I feel bad that it came to that, Sarah said honestly. Commander Rawlings isn't a monster. He's an officer who made poor choices under pressure, who let his pride override his judgment, and who forgot that leadership is a privilege, not a right. Do I regret exposing those choices? No. Because 3 sailors nearly died, and more would have if nothing changed. She stood up. Here's what I want all of you to take away from this. Your rank doesn't determine your worth. Your character does. You don't need stars on your collar to be a leader. You just need integrity, courage, and a willingness to do what's right even when it's hard. Sarah smiled at them. Now, Senior Chief Webb tells me you're all training to become future leaders in the Navy. So I have one question for you. What kind of leaders do you want to be? The kind who prioritize appearance over reality, or the kind who prioritize people over pride? The response was immediate. People over pride, ma'am. Good. Then make me proud. And when you're in positions of authority someday, remember this moment. Remember that the sailors serving under you deserve leaders who listen, who care, and who have their backs. Be those leaders. As Sarah left the classroom, she found Morrison and Williams waiting in the hallway. Admiral, Morrison said, I just received official word from FleetCom. They're keeping you here for another week to oversee the final remediation efforts and to ensure the transition to new command structure is stable. Understood, Captain. Williams spoke up. Ma'am, the base personnel wanted me to ask. Would you be willing to conduct a leadership symposium? Multiple sessions over the next week, open to all personnel, focusing on the lessons learned from this experience. Sarah considered it. She had other responsibilities, other commands demanding her attention. But looking at Williams's earnest face, thinking about those young sailors in the classroom, remembering Petty Officer Chen's relief and Chief Hayes's quiet pride. Yes, she said, let's do it. Over the next week, Sarah conducted 5 leadership symposiums. Each session was packed, standing room only with sailors, hungry to understand not just what had happened, but what it meant. She talked about integrity, about courage, about the difference between leadership and authority, about how to speak up when something's wrong, about how to create cultures where people feel safe raising concerns. But mostly, she listened. She listened to junior enlisted personnel share their fears about reporting problems. She listened to chiefs explain the pressure they felt to protect their sailors while following orders from above. She listened to officers wrestle with the tension between loyalty to their chain of command and loyalty to their principles. And through it all, she saw the base transforming. Not just in policies or procedures, but in culture. In the way people talk to each other. in the willingness to admit mistakes, in the commitment to doing better. On her final day at Norfolk, Sarah walked the base one last time. She stopped at Building 18, where new containment doors had been installed, and a plaque now hung commemorating the 3 sailors who'd been rescued. She visited the operations center, where Chief Rodriguez and her team were running more efficiently than ever. She toured the supply depot, where Chief Hayes was training the next generation of logistics specialists. Everywhere she went, sailors stopped to thank her, to shake her hand, to tell her how things had changed. At 1,500, the base held a small departure ceremony. Nothing formal. Sarah had specifically requested that just personnel who wanted to be there, gathering in the main plaza. Captain Morrison spoke first, thanking her for her leadership and guidance. Lieutenant Commander Williams presented her with a plaque in recognition of exemplary leadership and unwavering commitment to sailor welfare. Then Senior Chief Webb stepped forward with something unexpected, a hand-carved wooden model of an F/A-18 Hornet with Sparrow engraved on the base. "Ma'am," Webb said, his voice carrying across the plaza, "my team wanted you to have this, not because of your rank, not because you're an admiral, but because you showed us what real leadership looks like. You came here without your stars, without your authority, and you listened to us. You saw us. And then you used your power to fix what was broken." He handed her the model, and the assembled personnel erupted in applause. Sarah stood there, holding the wooden aircraft, feeling the weight of it, not just the physical weight, but the emotional weight of what it represented. These sailors had carved this by hand, had spent hours on detail work, had poured their gratitude and respect into every cut and polish. "Thank you," she said when the applause quieted. "Thank you for your trust, your courage, and your commitment to excellence. This base, these sailors represent the very best of the United States Navy, and it's been my honor to serve alongside you." She looked around at the faces in the crowd. "When I arrived here 2 weeks ago, I came to find problems. I found them. But I also found something I wasn't expecting. I found hope. Hope in the form of sailors who refused to accept that good enough was acceptable. Hope in the form of chiefs who kept fighting for their people even when it seemed pointless. Hope in the form of officers who maintained their integrity even when it cost them." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "You are that hope. Every one of you who spoke up, who documented concerns, who refused to stay silent, you're the reason this base is better now than it was 2 weeks ago. Not me. You." She smiled. "So don't thank me. Thank yourselves. Thank each other. And then get back to work, because this Navy needs sailors like you." The applause this time was deafening. And as Sarah walked through the crowd toward the car that would take her to the airport, sailors reached out not to touch her, but to be near, to be part of this moment of transformation. In the car, Morrison sat beside her, unusually quiet. "Something on your mind, Captain?" Sarah asked. "Just thinking about what you said. About how the sailors are the real heroes here, not you." Morrison smiled. "It's true, but it's also incomplete. They needed someone to give them permission to be heroes. Someone to show them their courage mattered. That was you." "Maybe," Sarah conceded. "But Captain, the real test comes next. Can you maintain this culture after I'm gone? Can you keep the trust you've rebuilt?" "Yes, ma'am. We can. Because you didn't just fix problems, you taught us how to prevent them. You showed us what good leadership looks like." Morrison looked at her seriously. "That's your real legacy here, Admiral. Not the investigation, not relieving Rawlings. It's the example you set." 3 months later, Sarah was back at her strike group headquarters when she received an email from Captain Morrison. Subject: "Thought you'd want to know Admiral Chen. Norfolk just completed a follow-up IG inspection unannounced this time. Final rating: outstanding in all categories. The inspectors noted our safety culture, open communication, and proactive problem-solving as examples for the entire fleet. Lieutenant Commander Williams was just selected for early promotion to commander and will be staying on as deputy. Chief Hayes was selected for Master Chief. And Petty Officer Chen was just accepted to the Naval Academy. He starts this summer. Commander Rawlings accepted administrative separation last week. He's retiring with a general discharge. No court-martial, but his Navy career is over. As for the base, We're thriving. Sailors are speaking up. Leaders are listening. And everyone remembers the lesson you taught us. Rank doesn't determine worth. Character does. Thank you for everything you did here. You changed more than policies. You changed lives. Respectfully, Captain Morrison. Sarah sat back in her chair, reading the email twice. Then she pulled out her phone and texted Sophia Martinez, who'd recently rotated to a new assignment. Heard about your promotion. Congratulations, Commander Select. The response came quickly. Thank you, ma'am. I learned from the best. Still telling people about the Admiral who went undercover to make sure we mattered. Sarah smiled and looked at the wooden F/A-18 model sitting on her desk, Sparrow gleaming in the afternoon light. She'd worn a lot of roles in her 23-year career: pilot, squadron commander, strike group commander, admiral. But for 1 week, she'd been something else. A consultant named Sarah Chen who listened to sailors, documented their concerns, and reminded everyone that leadership wasn't about rank, it was about character. And somehow, that week as nobody special had become one of the most important things she'd ever done. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.